Hey,
Can you hear me?
I can. You're looking like Mayor Reed, very sharp.
Well, after the last podcast, which is just so embarrassing, he's talking about his Italian-made shirts and all this other stuff. Man, I couldn't go out like that. So, I mean, I don't have Italian made, but
I'm wearing an Eagles t-shirt.
there you go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of How to Really Run a City, powered by Accelerator for America, the nation's leading do tank for cities. I'm Larry Platt of the Philadelphia Citizen, a nonprofit, nonpartisan media organization that seeks to reinvigorate democracy in the American city where it was born. Check us out at thephiladelphiacitizen.org. How to Really Run a City features two accomplished practitioners of the art of urban changemaking. If you've been with us before, you know them as former two-term Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed and former two-term Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter. And if you're frustrated by the bickering and finger-pointing and just plain anger coming from Washington, D.C., then this podcast is for you. It's a testament to the notion that there are really three political parties in America: Democrats, Republicans, and mayors, who have no choice but to be practical problem solvers in these fraught times. In today's episode, the mayors will speak with Diane Kalen-Sukra. She's a former city manager turned evangelist for Civility. She's the author of Save Your City: How Toxic Culture Kills Community and What to Do About It. And she's a consultant who counsels civic leaders throughout the nation and Canada on how to reaffirm civility and move their cities forward. Also, in our Accelerator for America segment, we'll hear from Accelerator CEO Mary Ellen Wiederwall on the importance of bipartisanship and civility in cities, particularly in these rough times. So with that, let's get to our mayors.
Hi, gentlemen.
Look at him. Smooth as silk.
Now y'all are just abusing me.
Smooth as silk. Salt and butter.
Yeah. What's happening? How y'all doing today?
Doing good, man. What's going on down there? You're in the ATL? Is
Yeah, man. It's quiet down here.
that right?
I have to say, you both are styling. I'm wearing an Eagles t-shirt. You both look like studs.
I've had my cap on all week.
I'm telling you, man, those Eagles are doing it.
Yeah. I told Larry, he did compliment me before you got on. I told him after our last podcast, I mean, it was just so embarrassing that, the Italian-made imported high collar and the whole thing. So I said, I got to step it up a little bit. I mean, I haven't gotten the Italian shirt yet.
I tell you, I'm so happy for your football team.
For the second time, the Vince Lombardi Trophy is headed to Philadelphia. Eagles fly in Super Bowl 59.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you guys, I have noticed that, especially in this town, which is a football town, when your team is doing well, the whole psyche of the city is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like, people who are normally assholes are the nicest folks on the street that you want to meet. Is that your experience when you're in office?
Yeah, there's no energy like it. I mean, I don't have the experience that you all have of winning the big one, but we got close against the New England Patriots, and Tom Brady came and stabbed us in the heart.
Oh, yeah. You guys were up with a big lead.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, and then, when I watched the football game with you guys when I was in Philly, the whole room was second by second. So I got a little taste of what watching Eagle football is like.
It's a little rabid up there, man.
I'm into it, though. I'm with it.
Yeah. And it's pretty much with all of our, all 4 or 5 of our teams. We include the soccer team, Philadelphia Union, even though, their stadium is in Chester nearby. But teams consistently will say they literally hate coming to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Because of the fans. It's not the game, it's the fans.
Yeah.
I do think Andy Reid is just one of the great coaches of all time.
Agreed. He was an Eagles man, too.
Eagles, yeah.
He was during my time, Kasim.
Yeah.
So Michael Vick had been He'd been with the Falcons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was 2010. Michael Vick came to the Eagles.
So I'll never forget, I was on vacation and Coach Reed called me. And he said, Mayor, I hate to bother you, but I need to let you know something. We're bringing Michael Vick onto the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to give you a heads up on that.
What a class thing to do.
Yeah. I said, Coach, I appreciate that. You know, I deal. I don't suggest what plays you should run, and you don't tell me how to pick up the trash. So we're good. And I said, but
nice.
Look, I know there'll be some controversy, but we think he's a good young man. Philly is the right place for him, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, I trust your judgment, and at the appropriate time, I'd love to sit down and talk with him, and welcome him to the city. So they made arrangements. Michael Vick came to my office a couple times.
Wow.
And I just sat and chatted with him. He recognized, what had happened, what he did, all of that. And I said, Michael, this is a town that appreciates effort. Now, you're always going to have the haters. But if you go out on that football field and do what you are capable of doing, these fans will embrace you, and they will respect you, and they will cheer for you. And basically not because of that conversation, but that's what he did.
Yeah.
Philadelphians embraced him.
Yeah. No,
I'm so happy for him. He's going to be the head coach at Norfolk State. And my uncle was president of Norfolk State for 22 years.
Wow.
Is that right?
Nice.
Yeah, Harrison B. Wilson.
I think he turned himself around.
Yeah.
Turned himself around. And this was the place to do it.
He was a terrific leader on that team here too. He really and had a great couple seasons.
He gave the full effort.
Yeah.
You all remember the great Ricky Waters statement. I don't know if you followed that one, Kasim.
What?
He was going over the middle, knew he was going to get stretched out, and he didn't go for the ball. They asked him after, he said, for who, for what? He got traded the next season.
Yeah, I like that.
No. You got to put it out there, bro.
For who, for what? They printed up T-shirts with "for who, for what" on it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's when you know you're done.
Yeah. This is all fun, but I wanted to get to one serious thing before we get to our guest.
Yeah.
Which is that I had a conversation this week with a civic leader, a governmental leader. I'll share it with you guys. And JP, just take this part out because Mayor Nutter, you know it. I think you know him. You remember?
Yeah.
Very interesting dude.
Yeah.
He said this to me, and it stopped me in my tracks. That the folks who Trump pardoned will soon be his foot soldiers, and as the deportation raids commence, they'll be storming into our cities, and it will be local cops and citizens on our streets, either fighting them or with them, a new type of civil war. Now, we talked last time about emergency preparedness, and I heard this from this civic leader, and I thought, yikes, are we prepared for the worst here? I don't want to contribute to panic. But that got me thinking, and I just wanted to. And I immediately thought of you guys. What's your reaction to that doomsday scenario that I heard this week?
Well, my reaction is we are not prepared for the worst, because we are still attempting to function under norms that are not being applied at the federal level. So, if you have been trained, as most people in public life are, to function within a traditional framework that is driven by the law, the rules, and history, then you are ill-equipped to deal with the current administration.
Mayor Nutter?
Well, let's just think about every day, virtually, there has been some, in Mayor Reed's words, if you're used to functioning with history and laws and respect and all
decorum,
that's almost every announcement they made has broken every rule that Mayor Reed and I and so many others have lived under and abided by, often whether we like it or not, right? So they put out a blanket statement to tell all the federal agencies basically stop spending money.
Right.
And Mayor Reed and I, we hear it. We're like, what are you talking? What does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it is so kind of crazy. It shows their intention, but it's so kind of crazy. Their own people don't know what it means. And so they had to rescind it, and of course blame the press that they misconstrued. And I was like, well, these are your words that you wrote, that you put out, right? And sent then sent a note to all the federal employees and said, what did they call it? Deferred resignation, which I never heard that term. I'd never heard those two words together before. Maybe I've been out of the game. Take 8 months at full salary. We're going to save $100 billion. And so the conversation is, okay, suppose half of the people at the CDC decided, I like that. I'm going to do that. But like, who's going to run these places? And so we're dealing with the level of lack of understanding and incompetence that normal, rational, governing people would never even imagine.
Well, I mean, I actually think that what is even more alarming is that you now have people engaging in this behavior who are actually competent. So they're doing things that, in my judgment, are horrific competently. So to go into the Justice Department, and as opposed to terminating 20 career Justice Department leaders with deep expertise, they simply reassigned them to a nothing assignment. And so the behavior that I'm seeing is, an attempt at a coup is a rehearsal for a second coup.
Right.
And with the protection provided by the Supreme Court.
Right.
And with the guarantee of the pardon power.
Yes.
And so in my mind, all of us need to be more diligent in thinking about this with much greater intensity, because our democracy is being dismantled.
We all remember the Saturday Night Massacre. Well, they fired 14 inspector generals and no one said a word.
That's right.
Yeah.
Some of whom had been appointed by Trump in the first term.
Yes.
Part of which I think is by design, that if you do so much stuff,
flood the zone,
the news pipeline can only absorb so much of it, right?
Yes.
And if the next thing and the next thing and the next thing are more bizarre than the last thing, then firing 14 IGs, which, many people in the general public may not necessarily recognize the importance of that, it literally went out the side door.
Yeah, no, if you read Anne Applebaum's book about autocracy, this is the autocratic playbook, which is you numb a citizenry into apathy. That's how autocrats win. So this is to be continued. I just wanted to, I think this is something we're going to have to talk about a lot, especially from a city's perspective. What can mayors do? Because some of our friends who have been on here with us are really going to be on the front lines and embattled, and maybe even facing federal charges. That has been threatened. So, and believe it or not, this actually does dovetail nicely with our guest today, Diane Kalen-Sukra, who I'd like to welcome to the program. She's a former city manager and author of Save Your City: How Toxic Culture Kills Community and What to Do About It. Diane, welcome to How to Really Run a City.
Thank you, Larry. Honored to be here. Great to be here with you, Mayor Nutter and Mayor Reed.
Hello. Good to see you.
Welcome.
Yes, welcome to the Civil War.
Well, I actually enjoying that conversation.
Yeah. Well, the reason I said it's relevant because I do think that you have dedicated your professional life now to a long-term solution, which is figuring out a way to quiet our politics, which I think is dead on, and our history shows that's how we ultimately get out of this kind of jam. But walk us through your story. You were the city manager in British Columbia, Canada, and then you sort of became an evangelist for civility in our politics. Tell us how you evolved.
Well, evangelist is exactly correct. And at the time when I began this in 2018, it was because I'm having similar concerns of the conversation that I just walked into, that incivility we think is pretty harmless, but taken to its extreme, like it exists on a spectrum. It starts with just mean comments, harsh words. It leads to mobbing, harassment, then threats, then violence, and ultimately civil war. And I think, when I look back, I probably have a historical sensitivity to these things. When I look at my family, they're, Greek immigrants, and my extended family would tell us the stories of, be it Turkish occupation and World War One and World War II, and what it was like to live in civil war. I just visited my 97-year-old grandmother, and she still recounts with utter clarity, when relatives were shot in the field in front of her. And people don't understand that civil war becomes like the purge. It's not like people don't even remember what side they're on. They're just killing, and very, very dangerous. So the sense of fragility of democracy was very clear to me. And I think when I was trying to make those warnings that incivility, unless addressed intentionally, unless we look at culture intentionally and address it, it is only going to escalate. That it spreads like a contagion. It becomes the way things get done. And so we think it's pretty harmless. Might is right. I'm just going to bully someone to get my way. Eventually, it spreads like a wildfire. And so, the things that I could tell you about my concerns are, it's kind of interesting because big city mayors like yourselves have already been on the forefront of these things. I'm sure when you became mayors, 15, 20 years ago, you already had security details. Am I correct?
Yes.
Right. And so I remember 10 years later, if we're looking at Mayor Nutter's beginning of his term, his election. And in 2018 is when I delivered my first address to a conference of city managers and elected officials and started telling them the story about how, we have a rising incivility problem. It's going to threaten, political culture is deteriorating over time. I could see it across the country because I had worked in multiple different communities. And you get that vantage point because when you work in one place, you think it's just the way it is where you are. But when you work in other places, you can see, no, this is a social problem that's extending to all Western democracies. And they kind of laughed at me when I was saying, the problems that big city mayors are coming to a community near you. And most of your colleagues in the municipal sector, thought they were immune to it. Remember, something like 80% of municipalities, I think it's 75% in the US, have less than 5,000 people in them. And so they were not dealing with the huge economic challenges, the huge social challenges around homelessness and joblessness and the opioid crisis, and even the level of political violence that is now spread everywhere. And so today, for instance, in Canada, the mayors of the big cities do have security. All of our municipalities across all Western democracies are armoring up to protect themselves from the people they serve, to protect both the individual, not just the top elected officials, but the senior staff, the frontline staff, and the actual physical property from all kinds of levels of damage. And even if you look at, for instance, United Kingdom, just last year at their election, they extended police protection to not just every single local elected official, but also every candidate. So it's become dangerous to run for office. So now this is definitely not just a threat to it's a threat to our entire democracy because, of course, the less socially secure you are, the less likely you are to subject yourself to that kind of violence. In 2021, the National League of Cities did a wonderful comprehensive report, and it's pretty forward-thinking because the fascinating thing about this is that a lot of governments and a lot of local government associations have kind of been trying to dodge the issue because it seems so huge. How do you transform culture? And but they did a report and they documented this, that it is in the United States, something like 81% of local elected officials are facing harassment and abuse on the job, up to and including death threats. And I just held, sort of as the culmination of the 6th year of my Civility tour, a global civility tour of civic leaders from around the world, and about 450 people. 50% of them were from the United States, around 30% were from Canada, and the remainder were from Australia, United Kingdom, and 5 other countries. And what's fascinating is that the statistics around local governments being affected by incivility are very similar in all those nations, like within percentage points, including now 20% of local elected officials saying that their family members are being harassed. But what's become clear is that if we have cultures that are profoundly toxic, where we cannot govern and there's many municipalities facing governance collapse. Like in my situation as a city manager, I had inherited one of those municipalities. It became clear to me that we need to address this culture issue as a culture risk, like as an actual risk management situation, identifying the problem, diagnosing where their culture is on this spectrum. Like, are we heading towards civil war? Are we still, have our wits about us? And leading on this front. What did I do? I wrote a book about it first to express this in like clear details. It's called Save Your City. And I wrote it in 2 editions because everyone has a role to play in culture in this garden of community, right? Citizens have a role and civic leaders have a role. But with all things where there's authority, civic leaders have an even greater responsibility and even greater ability to impact culture.
Hey, Diane, let me just jump in real quick and get the mayor's take on this, because these are 2 of the most practical, pragmatic leaders I've ever met. And I think, Mayor Reed likes to say, you can't nice your way to victory. And so I want to hear from them as to if they're in office today and they're getting death threats and the civility, and they bring in someone like you as a consultant, and this is what they hear. What is your reaction?
My reaction is that I would be interested in how it's being applied and what has been the response to your book directly, and what have been the impacts that you've seen since you did the work and the thinking related to implementing this value that should run not only through the buildings of city halls, but has to expand outward into the hundreds of neighborhoods that we represent. How do you do it once you believe?
So I began mostly because I was a city manager. I was being called in primarily by city managers and city manager conventions and whatnot. And what was interesting is we've witnessed a kind of transformation in corporate culture and management thinking. And yet a lot of that thinking, local government was a bit slower to be applied. A lot of civic leaders don't have your levels of experience and even education to handle that kind of pressure. A lot of our civic leaders are, they were running a small business and all of a sudden they're elected in these smaller communities and they're being traumatized, put under high levels of pressure. So my initial objective was to help them manage the rising toxicity and, the heavy public exposure. And so I began with resiliency training for them as opposed to culture transformation. But my book has a roadmap to renewing civic culture in it that can be applied for everyone. And so far, 200 civic leaders, both elected and staff, have completed this roadmap. Which ultimately, it's generic in sense. I went through classical antiquity to find the sort of major steps, because we have been through cultural decay many times before, and we have been through cultural renewal many times before. And the roadmap begins with yourself. Like, I didn't call the book Save Yourself, but really that's where it starts, right? You can't save your city if you yourself are a toxic element within it. So we ourselves can strive to be civil and to be upstanders, to speak out against injustice. And this has been the area of primary training for civic leaders for years. And yet we don't do it in our local government schools. They're often called like charm schools, where you learn the mechanics of government, but not so much that leadership element around servant leadership and the values and the character development you need to kind of sustain, to be this positive social force. The second step is diagnosing civic culture, which you do intuitively as civic leaders. The third step is to foster civility circles. So that would be develop the habits of democracy within your sphere. This is going to be different for elected leaders, for staff, and for citizens. But that's the point. You each do your personalized roadmap. And then the next step is civic education, promoting training to whatever elements possible. And the last is fundamentally loving your neighbor. You're not going to necessarily change the world, but you can change your department. You can change your citizen group. You can change your council.
Dan, let me ask you this. Was there a bit of an inflection point over the last 10, 15 years where you saw, kind of a significant uptick in what we're now referring to as incivility or uncivility? And so, for instance, it seems to me that during the first, I'm not trying to be political with you, but just picking a point in time, during the first Trump administration, things just got nastier. And then the pandemic both Mayor Reed and I saw that anger of the public during the pandemic, took it out on many people who were in office, took it out on incumbents, and many of them, a number of them lost, or incumbents decided, I don't really want to do this anymore. I'm not running for re-election. I mean, there was a significant turnover in that time frame, and we see it in road rage, we see it in just out on the street. I mean, what has happened? Is there some particular thing that you have observed that becomes that inflection point and things have taken a very, very bad turn?
Well, indeed, your instincts are correct on this. And wherever we have a major incident, there, like for instance, that the assassination attempt during the Trump campaign, there was an uptick in violence even at the local level. There's no question that our social fabric is unraveling. And there are certain things that are catalysts in it and others that, make it better. But for the most part, most things are combining to make it better. And I know Mayor Reed made a point earlier that he believes we're not ready for an intensification of this. And indeed, we're not, because the true roots of incivility are very deep and they kind of rest in two places. One is the overall breach of the social contract, the fact that the types of experiences and lives and commitments, contract we have with government, with business, and the average working person seems to have been broken, that it's not clear how we make a living anymore and sustain ourselves as individuals and as communities. So that's a huge challenge. But on the other hand, is the socialization process is itself broken. I think back to, and I hope we can get a chance to talk about this, but your speech that you gave at the West Carmel Church, Mayor Nutter, where you identified, you held families accountable and you tried to shore them up. And one of the factors, there was an urbanist, Jane Jacobs, who 20 years ago warned us that that cities are on the brink of cultural collapse. And one of the primary reasons, she said, is the collapse of the household and the family as meeting the both economic and social nurturing needs of individuals, that the city cannot be a substitute for that. And you literally said it. You said the city's not a babysitting service.
Now, I have to tell you, but it is inconceivable to me, that in my teenage years, that I would be out somewhere, let alone downtown, at 9 o'clock at night. Impossible for me to fathom. Because my mother said, boy, I know you have a watch, but if the watch stops working, if you forget to wind it, if the battery breaks, there's only one thing you need to do. Look up. When that light goes on, have your butt on the steps. I don't care whether it's Eastern Standard Time, Daylight Saving Time, Pacific Time, Mid-Atlantic Time, North Pole Time. When that light goes on, have your butt on the steps. Don't let me have to look for you. That's what she said. So it's really easy. Real simple.
And this has been fundamental for years, that it should be part of policy to ensure that you cannot replace that institution of family. It is an institution of democracy, it's an institution of society, and it's an institution of the city. The role of civic leaders has always been to bring us from dysfunction to function, from chaos to order.
Are people prepared to listen to a leader? I mean, how do you even break through?
Well, you did it. I mean, you've done it, and people have to do a whole lot more of it. When this issue that we started with about niceness, right? Mayor Reed's point that you can't nice your way to victory. And indeed, there are classical civic virtues of civic leadership, and they are not niceness. I mean, we need to be pro-social, but niceness is not one of them. Niceness is a form of agreeableness and pleasantness that you might want to do at a picnic. But when you're dealing with very serious issues like the flash mobs and violence, people are, if you approach it with niceness, people are going to assume either you don't care, or you're incompetent, or you don't have a plan.
I think that governing today, I think governing today is very, very different than it was when we were in our time. See, we're the Great Recession mayors. You're now dealing with the pandemic mayors or the post-pandemic mayors. And I think this public today is very different. I'm not saying it was all sunshine and rainbows during my time, and people were really pissed off during the Great Recession. But I think we're at a different place for a lot of different reasons.
There are these psychologists that they wanted to write a book on the rising narcissism in society, and they were going to study individuals who are highly narcissistic. And I think they were beginning by going to the penitentiaries. They thought this is where all the narcissists are going to be, that the psychopathic narcissists, the dangerous ones, were going to be assimilated. And they found that indeed they're not. They're existing freely within society. So they began to study them instead. And when asked why, they realized that part of the reason why narcissistic traits and narcissistic abusive behaviors, manipulation, gaslighting, scapegoating, harassment, all that stuff that passes for kind of normal nowadays, is become so prevalent is because from a very young age now, we don't have the role of leaders like teachers and parents and civic leaders to cultivate the garden of community, to weed out the toxicity, to identify behaviors that are damaging community. Like, it's selfishness, ill will towards your neighbors and friends. It's always going to be bad. Humanity can never transform to a point where that becomes a good thing.
But Diane, my friend and colleague revealed why he's a professor at Columbia. And I just want to say it a little differently. It was Donald Trump's fault, more than any other person's fault. When we have an intellectual conversation about what happened, the president of the United States has traditionally been the exemplar in our country for behavior and decorum. Republican or Democrat, there was a framework with which they conducted themselves. And this person opened up a tear in the fabric of our society because he studied Mitt Romney's race. And he came to the conclusion that Mitt Romney got beat by Barack Obama because he was not vicious enough, which is why he had the kind of disdain for Mitt Romney, because he felt that Mitt Romney would not, and John McCain would not do what it took. So when the woman attacks Barack Obama,
right,
and he stops her in the audience.
John McCain.
I got to ask you a question. I do not I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not. No,
ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
And when there were things that Mitt Romney, because of his character, simply would not do, Donald Trump concluded that that was a weakness, and that in order to win, he had to activate a kind of human that had been pushed out of the American mainstream.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting.
And that is what he is bringing in. So I'm here to advocate for the fact that folks like us and Diane have to beat these people. And in politics, the only behavior that is recognized is losing behavior. Politicians stop doing things when it gets beat. And because people see Donald Trump continue to prevail, they are now shifting towards morally acceptable bankrupt behavior. They let a talk show host become the Secretary of Defense for the most lethal military that has ever been created in the history of the world. A talk show host that appears to have a drinking problem because of the force of will of this person. And so while I totally agree that we have to care about civility, folks like us can't create room for losers. Because if you keep losing,
Right.
this behavior is going to keep an object in motion, stays in motion until it meets a countervailing force that stops it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it this way. You just sparked in me, Mayor Reed, the notion that incivility is the new trickle down, right? That Donald Trump gave permission, and incivility has trickled down. And Diane, I'd like to get your take on that, because when I read your roadmap, it's everything that the Philadelphia Citizen stands for. It's engagement, it's voting, it's holding the door for your neighbor at the grocery store, it's cleaning a city street. What Mayor Reed is saying is that may not be enough to get back to quieting the electorate so we can get culture war out of politics. What do you say to that?
I see both of your points, and I you see, the question is, why does he even resonate? Like, if Donald Trump had existed 25 years ago and said the same rhetoric, the appetite in society would not have been there for it. And like I say, the essence of our democratic culture has fundamentally been lost. And so how do we actually renew that? And I think it's going to take a new kind of civic leadership. That same apathy, which was so comfortable for us in local government, because we would just go to meetings, we'd all vote unanimously, nobody would care, and everybody seemed to trust us. It looked like consent. But in reality, what was happening was people weren't paying attention, and they weren't exercising their democratic muscles. And now when we need them to, they don't have them. They literally they can't discern between something that belongs under feudalism or something. And there used to be after World War II, after all the soldiers came back and all of our blood had been shed, Yale University, together with Encyclopedia Britannica, launched a civic education program for all citizens across the country. And it begins by, this professor-like person explaining to people that now that the war is over, we must all look for signs of despotism in our community. And they started explaining to them, you got to look for fair media, both sides, shared power, shared responsibility, shared respect. Whenever people are being mistreated, this is a sign of despotism in your community. Your community could become authoritarianism and lead towards fascism. That we don't even talk about those things with civic leaders, let alone citizens. We've gone from just public consultation to needing to actually educate. And very much like the way the Philadelphia Citizens you're beyond the role of just the media outlet. You're literally educating and empowering people. And that's the kind of extra effort it's going to take from all of us, including citizens, to actually make the kind of change that is going to preserve our democracy. Because at the end of the day, that's really what's at stake. Do we want to be a free people? Do we want to self-govern ourselves? And so I think there's no substitute for encouraging people's agency, for building people up. This is why I think that's our primary responsibility at this time, to build people up and to get civic leaders outspoken again.
That's great. I can't thank you enough for the work you're doing, because I do think that in the long run, this is the only way that we get back to a place of who knew that the 20th century would be the outlier of civics, but so far it looks that way now. So I can't thank you enough. Your book is terrific, and I'd love to have you back. And I know we were talking about having you come to Philadelphia. I look forward to that as well.
And thank you both for continuing to share your leadership and wisdom. You didn't. Too many people just go off in the wilderness on the golf course or something, but here you are, still fighting the good fight. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, you can't sit around waiting for the tea time. None of that.
That's right.
Thank you, Diane.
Indeed.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
What do you think of that? I mean, I think in the long run, she's onto the exact answer. I'm a little concerned about the short run.
What I feel about it is that you can't implement that kind of visionary thought if you don't win. And the people who are prevailing right now wouldn't implement her book or her thinking.
Yeah.
The prevailing mood in the country has to be pushed back. And so whenever we have our conversations, I always try to to add the element of what are we going to do right now.
Yeah. In the absolute Baptist tradition, Mayor Reed had a must be Ann in the background saying, "Make it plain, preacher, make it plain, make it plain." He said, "No, I want to be very clear. It was Donald Trump."
No, I mean, you were killing. I could see you at Columbia walking your students through how we got here. And you're lucky that I wasn't your guest at the esteemed institution that you teach at. Because I would have said he did it. Well, it's not a who did it, it's a he done
it. Well, and also the other thing you remind me of, Mayor Reed, is that the principle that politics at its best is actually an argument. It should be an argument. It should be. It should be a civil argument, but it is an argument. We should be debating ideas and disagreeing instead of following dear leader.
Larry, one thing happened to me in politics that changed my view of engagement in politics. One of my close friends who was a far rabid right Republican, but in the Georgia State Senate, there are only 56 of us. And so because it's such a small group, you develop real relationships with people that you really do not agree with. But, when the grilled cheese come out, you spend a lot of time together. And this guy I really liked, and I would not reveal his name so I don't risk his physical safety in his district. But a bill came up, and the bill was to eliminate the income tax for the state of Georgia. Our income tax is 6%. He wanted to eliminate it, and they were going to do so without providing an alternative to fund a variety of things, but primarily education in the state. And Georgia is one of 7 states with AAA credit from Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, right? And I know that this guy is a serious guy. And when they introduced the bill, I go over to him in the back of the chamber quietly, and I say, "What are you doing?" And he looked me in my eye, and he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Kasim, we can't win without the crazies." And that statement has been the through line through politics ever since he said what he said. All the way through Donald Trump. They can't win without the crazies.
That's a great anecdote. And it dovetails with Mary Ellen's comments this week. JP, let's take a listen to Accelerator for America on bipartisanship.
In recognition of today's guest, I want to talk about bipartisanship. Accelerator for America was created in 2017 and built to adapt to the constantly evolving policy landscape. From leaning into opportunity zones during the first Trump administration, to deploying national models for economic relief during the pandemic, and to most recently helping localities maximize historic investments from the federal government. We have found that even during the most trying times, there are still things that our elected leaders and everyday residents can agree upon, things like infrastructure investments and increasing housing supply. The 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is a landmark bipartisan achievement, proving what's possible when leaders from both sides of the aisle come together to invest in America's future. That bipartisanship was evident by the gathering of Republicans and Democrats at the bill signing and later events where former President Joe Biden stood alongside Republican lawmakers, including Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky and Republican Congressman Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania, to celebrate bridge projects in their respective states, and with Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina to highlight a statewide network of electric vehicle chargers, all IIJA projects. Through our United for Infrastructure initiative, Accelerator for America is working with leaders across the country and across the political spectrum to galvanize support for the reauthorization of that legislation in 2026. Housing is the next bipartisan frontier. Some Americans are excited and hopeful as we enter into this new administration in Washington, and others are worried and fearful. But there are still issues that we can come together on and make meaningful progress, particularly at the local level. For example, Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas, a Democrat, worked with the Republican-led State House and Republican governor to secure $28 million in state funding for a new park constructed over a portion of interstate in downtown KC. There isn't a Republican or a Democrat way to fill a pothole, and no one cares if you're an R or a D in the frightful moment of a 911 call. We just want our government to work, our infrastructure to get us to work, to school, and the big game. And we all deserve a place to call home.
Well, guys, that's such an interesting message because it's what we always talk about here, the power of local bipartisanship. But I'm a little concerned that if the federal government is going to be so crazy and so extreme, it will, as we talked about, trickle down into the local and possibly erode local bipartisanship. What should mayors be doing right about now to keep the team together, such as it is?
Well, few mayors that I've talked to, what I've told them first and foremost is just try not to be reactive. Flavor Flav was right. Don't believe the hype.
Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype.
They make an announcement on Monday. They make an announcement on Tuesday. They make an announcement on Wednesday. People are running around with their heads on fire, and not one damn thing has happened. Again, all this design of creating this confusion and chaos to get people all spun around and spun up. And so I think the first thing for mayors is, just, okay, yeah, I heard that. Let's see what they actually, put forward. I don't know.
My advice is similar, but do what you want to do within your power. And for what you don't want to do, make me. Make me.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You get legal counsel. You get a legal opinion. You make sure that the judgment that you're making is within a legal framework. And if your general counsel and if your outside counsel tell you have the ability to do it a different way, do what you want to and make somebody make you. The number of things that he's doing is overwhelming on them.
Right.
And so by the time they get around to trying to make you do these things that are horrific, it will stretch their organization thin and cause them to get less done.
Right.
Because nobody can fight 3,000 fights.
Mm-hmm.
And you ought to be one of the fights.
Right. Same, I agree with everything that you said. And this is not, as I say, hope is not a strategy. But, the one other thing that I think we know about these folks is they have a great tendency to overreach. Because now it's just throw everything up on the wall, see what sticks. But they will do some things that, I think, as the court said one time, it will shock the conscience.
Yeah, you're right about them overreaching. But what's bothering me about their overreach is they've bracketed on a significant amount of the technology community of very smart people with unlimited resources. And so that was a bracket. In the past, the technology community would not publicly stand beside Donald Trump and publicly facilitate his behavior. Elon Musk, we all know where he is. If you look at Mark Zuckerberg and others and the people who are now publicly willing to stand along him, it has a force multiplier impact.
Right.
That makes whatever mistakes they make that are harmful to the country amplified in a way that he could not do in the first version of his presidency.
Right. They have very publicly shifted over.
I mean, the Washington Post, owned by Amazon, by Bezos, these people are coordinating with a person that they would not be in a room with during his first term.
Nope.
Well, we will need to continue these types of conversations because I think this is going to be critical. That's why I'm so thankful for the time that you guys donate to this, because I think your wisdom on these matters can really help people on the front lines in these next few years, because you've been there and done that. You're a couple of old heads. I couldn't resist, man.
Not a problem. Better than the alternative.
That's right. That's right.
I love living, baby, and I'm having a ball at it.
I'm living.
That is the right response.
Hey, by the way, how about Mixmaster Mike quoting Flavor Flav today?
No problem. Man, let me tell you something. He always brings it. I mean, he always brings it.
Don't believe the hype.
Don't believe the hype.
That's why folks need to tell people about how to really run a city. I mean, it's going to be needed now more than ever. Every time.
Yeah.
He never fails to give you something that you can use if you're in this space.
Well, that's true of both of y'all. I can't thank you enough, as usual. Thanks, guys. This is great.
Bye-bye.
See you, man. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye. Well, that's it for this episode of How to Really Run a City. Thanks for joining us. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends about us. We really want to widen the conversation because by 2050, something like 2/3 of the world will live in cities. As cities go, so goes the nation, and so goes the world. For now, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Remember to check out the Good Government Show podcast, where host Dave Martin conducts conversations with elected leaders about how government can work for all of us. Check out the Good Government Show wherever you get your podcasts or visit goodgovernmentshow.com.